In this video, I want to convince you that you don't need more information to start a business. And I want to do that by telling you a story about how I started this business, the Discipline Group. Now, I want to take you back about 5 years. I was in my last year of high school and I knew I didn't want to get a full-time job later in life. I knew I somehow wanted to be a business owner, but at that point, I had no idea how that was going to happen. And it's so fun to look back on when I'm in the situation that I'm in right now. And so back then, I just knew I didn't want a full-time regular job. I wanted to be a business owner. And so what happened was, after I graduated from high school, I started consuming a ton of content on entrepreneurship. Every day I would be working a full-time job where I would spend 2 hours taking the train back and forth to my workplace. And on the train, I would listen to podcasts and videos about selling, about what entrepreneurship is. And most of this content was produced by Valuetainment, by Patrick Bet-David, which I've mentioned before, a guy that I used to look up to a lot, I still respect. It really piqued my interest and I really wanted to become an entrepreneur. I knew this is what I wanted in my future, but I still had no idea how I was going to do it. And so I would come home in the evening, I would go work out, I would come back, I would read books, self-help books, self-improvement books, business books. The first book I ever got was the Rich Dad, Poor Dad book, which I have up here, and it's so fun to look back on. And so having consumed all of this content, having gotten started with reading Innovation and Entrepreneurship and Rich Dad, Poor Dad and these business books, I knew, you needed a product. I knew you needed to find some people to sell your product to, and that owning a business was gonna be the way to get rich. But I did not have a product and I had no idea what I would be able to sell and what people would be interested in buying from me. And you've probably found yourself in a similar situation if you don't find yourself there right now. And so I knew that, I had that information, but I was still scared shitless to get started. And I don't want you to continue feeling like this. What happened was, when I started a year later at Copenhagen Business School, I started my degree and I knew still that I wanted to start a business, still had no idea what to do. Then came lockdown during my first year. And while I was home, still studying, I was scared about what to do, but I knew that something had to be done. I had to do something, I just had to try. And so I decided to buy 5 t-shirts with like custom text that I'd designed online. And I decided that if I bought these 5 shirts and sold them off, I could make just a little bit of money and it would prove that I could somehow start a small side hustle business. And so I bought the shirts, I waited, and they arrived, and I had one of the first experiences of trying something and failing and learning because of multiple reasons. I didn't like the material itself, I didn't like the quality of it, and I didn't like the fit of the shirt. And so that showed me that if you don't believe in your product, it's gonna be very hard to sell. Because what happened was, I told my cousin about it, who was very generous and who bought one of the shirts, and I'm still to this day so grateful for that. Thank you so much. But none of the other 4 shirts I ended up selling. And for a long time, I kept them just to have them as a reminder of what I tried and how it went. Following that lesson, I realized that it was actually a lot more scary to ask people to buy something that I thought initially. And it's still so fun to think about this. And I laugh at it because of the situation where I'm in right now, where I don't mind talking about these things and doing these things. But I didn't let that knock me out. Like, I still knew this is what I wanted somehow. And so the next thing that happened was, and I don't know how entirely I became convinced of this, but all throughout my years at high school, I wanted this big party speaker you can buy in Denmark, which is a brand called Soundbox. They're super cool, and I just always wanted to have one because they're so durable. They can play really loud and you can use them for all sorts of parties. And I really wanted one, and so I figured that some people were renting out these speakers, and people were. I took some of the money I'd saved up from my full-time job and actually spent about 1,500, close to 2,000 bucks on buying 2 of these big speakers, which I still have. And I decided to try and rent these speakers out. But what ended up happening was that once I'd set up the website and got my rental contracts in order, then came lockdown again. And so because of that, and because I was still scared to ask people to buy my stuff, I didn't do anything again. And so a couple of months passed and I kind of just gave up on the project. I really honestly didn't do much with it. I just had the speakers now and I had the website set up. I'd gotten a good friend of mine at the time to make a website for me who knew stuff about SEO. And actually what ended up happening was the social distancing and restrictions for parties were lifted, partially at least. I had like 2 completely random sales happening and I delivered the speakers. I, rented them out, got the money for it. And I think the people had good experiences. But at that point, I was in a place in my life where I was just about to move out on my own. And so I had quite a number of things that were going on. And I really had come to a point where I didn't want to pursue that business anymore. Even though I'd just gotten 2 sales, it was too much for me for some reason. So this was the second failed attempt. After this, I thought, maybe I could get started with something that is not only gonna make me money, but is also gonna be a big contribution to people in the world, because I really wanna make a change for people who struggle to do that for themselves. And so I wanted to get started with a charity app. It should make it a lot easier for people to donate money to charity with like small spare change that they might have had in their accounts anyway, and it should make it easy to do that on a monthly basis, and all of the proceeds should go to the charity foundation or whatever it ended up being. As someone with some background in coding and development, I got started on the app and ended up coming quite a long way with it. But then what happened was that in 2022, I went on exchange to Singapore, and this is actually really where this business all started. I knew I made a goal in 2022 that before 2023, and I might have made this goal even earlier than that, before 2023, I wanted to have started my business because I just wanted to start something and stick with it. And so I left for Singapore, and when I left for Singapore, I brought a book. And the book was Crushing It by Gary Vaynerchuk, which I have up on my bookshelf. And that book, alongside finding the now humongously famous Alex Hormozi online, were the 2 things that finally convinced me to start a business and commit to making it a success. What happened in Singapore was that I grew as a person, became a lot more independent, dared to do more things. But Gary's book and Hormozi told me that it's okay to fail. In fact, you need to fail, because if you don't fail, you won't learn enough to get where you want to go. And it sounds so incredibly simple to talk about it like this. Being there and having the experiences was some of the most life-changing advice I'd gotten at the time, because it helped me be okay with not succeeding immediately. And I'd always placed this expectation on myself that if I started something, I had to make it work immediately. And I think you might be in a similar situation. It's so easy for family members and friends to make it sound like, well, if you get started with something, of course, for it to be successful, you should have your customers and stuff working within maybe a couple of weeks or months. Or maybe you place these expectations on yourself. And it makes it so incredibly tough to allow yourself to get started and not know what you're doing, but just try, test things, fail and learn. And I don't want you to continue in that state, because otherwise you're never going to make it. And so that's the whole purpose of this video. And so what ended up happening in Singapore was I started the brand called Discipline Apparel, where I just started a business that would sell print-on-demand shirts with a few Japanese designs I really liked. When I came home, and so I dedicated and committed myself to making this business succeed. Now, it might not be in the form of selling shirts or clothing. It might not be a fashion brand, but this business that I started would evolve into something that I would make work. When I came back in 2023, I continued working on the business. I ran ads. I reached out to people. I tried giveaways. I did a bunch of stuff, made a few sales from friends, got one sale from a random person, but I didn't get anything I would consider a measurable success or significant success with that business or brand. And so I realized a couple of things. One, I did not want to create a clothing business or a fashion business. And two, it was going to be very difficult for me to sell enough shirts compared to doing something like a service business or a software business. And so this was probably not the way for me to make the money I wanted. I decided to rebrand to the Discipline Group. I decided that I was going to be doing something different than selling shirts or t-shirts or clothing. And so all the clothing that is sold in the business now is purely merch on the side. It's really just there for the people who want to represent the values of this business, the values that I care about, but I don't push it or promote it in any way. Rebrand it to the Discipline Group, committed to really wanting to make entrepreneurship available to everyone. Started the startup coaching program, which I'm running now, and that's what's been going on ever since. And we're in 2025 now. If I'd never had that experience in Singapore where I realized that it would never work without failing, then I wouldn't have allowed myself to just try and not know what the end result would look like, so I could get started. Again, that's the point I want to make in this video. If you have an expectation that you need to be successful or you need to make X amount of dollars within a certain time frame for your business to be considered a success for you, that might be possible for sure, but it's also going to make it much more difficult for you to get started if you don't have a lot of experience already. And so my greatest piece of advice in this video to you is be okay with failing. Don't think of this as something that's going to be a half-year project or a 1-year project. Think of this as something that's going to be a 10-year project or a 20-year project that is going to make you money, but it's also going to help people and make an impact in the world in some way. If you can change the horizon that you think of, you can change your expectations of when you want it to succeed. And if you do that, you will be much more okay with permitting yourself to not know what the end result will look like, but to say, I know I have to get started. I know this is my starting point, trying this thing out I know right here, but I have no idea what it's going to turn out to be. But I know I'm gonna start and I know I'm not gonna quit. And if you can just be okay with that, the chance of you succeeding will be so infinitely higher because you will keep going, learn along the way, take the losses when they come, but you won't stop. And that's ultimately the most important thing. Over a long enough period of time, you will succeed. It's just that most people, go some of the way, find out it's not that easy, find out there's some other opportunity that looks easy, and then they either quit what they're doing, switch to the new thing, or they just don't believe they can do it anymore. And I don't want this to be you. I want to see you succeed so you can change your life and the people around you's lives and make an impact. So you don't need more information to start your business. You need to permit yourself to fail, because you will fail. Everybody fails. And if this video hasn't showed you that, I don't know what will. Thank you for watching as always. Please comment what type of video you would like to see from me on this channel. As always, of course, stay disciplined.